Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Hey, it's Storyworthy. Today on the show, paranormal podcaster Jim Harold talks about how he became interested in the paranormal.
And I was just thinking of things that really interest me. Every time I go in a bookstore or a library, I would go right to that section, and it was never big enough. So I thought, I want to start a paranormal podcast. What could I call it? It's paranormal, it's a podcast. It's paranormal, it's a podcast. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. The Paranormal Podcast.
Today on the show, paranormal podcaster Jim Harold talks about how he got into the supernatural and the paranormal. Stay close.
Hey, it's Jim Harold, and you're listening to Storyworthy.
Welcome to Storyworthy. My name is Christine Blackburn, and I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Whether you're a longtime fan of the show of almost 13 years or a brand new listener, welcome to Storyworthy. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the show last week with storyteller Frank Trainer. Boy, oh boy, Frank Trainer, what a funny guy. He's from Argentina, and he tells this story about trying to get into the United States through Miami, and it's a big mess, but it's a big funny mess, so you're going to enjoy it. Go back, you guys. Listen to Frank Trainer last week, but not today. Stick with me now, because today I've got a really interesting person on the show. As you know, I usually have on comedians and comedy writers, but this guy completely fascinates me because he has a podcast about the paranormal and the supernatural. And I actually think those are two different words. They're different words, right, Jim?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They're different. Again, cover some of the same area, but different words, yeah.
What's the difference between paranormal and the supernatural?
Well, I think it's a difference of perception. I think these days people think, ooh, it's ghosts, which I actually disagree with that. I think it's ghosts and a lot more. And that's where I think supernatural is perceived as a broader term that covers a great deal of ground. Ghosts, kind of head scratchers, kind of things that time slips and life after death and so forth. So as it's perceived, I think supernatural is a broader term.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I've heard you interviewed on other shows, and I know that you said your father was a steel worker and your mother was a housewife, and that's pretty much what my parents were until my father got out of the steel mill and became an accountant. But where are you from, Pennsylvania?
No, I'm from Ohio. I'm from the Cleveland, Ohio area, which still is a steel-making town, but used to be not as big as Pittsburgh, obviously, but a big steel-making town. And my dad worked in the steel mill for about 30 years, or more than 30 years. And, I grew up in a very working-class neighborhood and was always fascinated by broadcasting, and that got me onto the road to what I do today. Plus, I was always interested in the paranormal thanks to a little show called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, definitely. In Search Of. But also, okay, so I grew up in Pittsburgh and you're in Cleveland. It's very similar. I mean, everything about our cities is similar.
Except you have a good football team.
Okay, but do you think part of you getting into the supernatural, the paranormal, was because it is so boring back there? Is that true?
I think it's more because it's gritty. I grew up in the city. Not a suburb, in the city. And a lot of the kids that I grew up with, similar interests into adulthood that are pursuing kind of similar tracks. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. My mother was always very much into the paranormal and all of it. And she would like to do little tricks, like she would hold this needle by a thread over your palm. And depending on how
pendulum,
how the pendulum swung, you're going to have one girl and two boys or something like that. I mean, we were always doing little tricks like that because it just kind of took us out of the sameness of where I was growing up anyway.
Yeah, well, my place wasn't that much more exciting. So that may have been it, too. The idea to kind of think about exploring other realms and things was a method of escape.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. And I can never really understand the skeptics because there's not a lot of disproving of things. I mean, I guess there is, but recently there's been 4 UFOs shot down. Now, I guess a skeptic would be somebody that would say, no, you don't even know if that was a UFO because it could have just been space debris.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they are apparently going to go. They're going to be able to pick up some of this stuff off the ice in Alaska and Lake Huron. I think in Lake Huron it's sunk, but they're still going to go after this stuff. So are you looking forward to finding out what they come up with?
I would like to find out. I don't think we're going to find out. I don't think we're going to be told. But again, I'm not 100% that it's of any kind of extraterrestrial genesis. It might be, for example, the Chinese government sent something else over. I still have an open mind. But to your point about the skeptics, I think and I mean skeptics with a big S, like debunkers, they go in saying there's nothing to this. Whereas I think that, if the most rational way to approach something like this is, I don't know, and let's explore all possible possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds so much more practical to me to say it that way rather than just to laugh it off. But I do think, okay, I had on writer and actor Bob Crane recently. Now, his father, Bob Crane from Hogan's Heroes, was murdered and it was unsolved. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think through the paranormal, or is it the supernatural, isn't there any way to go back and find out what happened? Now, the guy that they do think killed him is now dead.
Carpenter.
Yeah, so he's dead. So he's out of the picture. But is there any way to approach that particular murder that you would think of off the top of your head?
Well, I mean, there's always the possibility of psychics. But let me say this. I think that's something you have to be really careful about, okay? That's something you have to watch, and I'll tell you why. There was a case here in Cleveland, Ohio, where a young woman had been missing for years. She was missing since she was a teenager. I think she'd been missing by several years at this point. A famous psychic, and I won't mention her name, went on the Montel Williams show and told the woman's mother that she was dead. Okay? And the woman ended up dying. This mother died. Well, lo and behold, a couple of years later, the girl was discovered alive, and she's alive today. And in fact, she's doing great work on one of the TV outlets here, helping expose cases of missing people. So, first of all, I do believe there are legitimate psychics. I believe that. I also believe there are people who may not be quite as legitimate. So what I'm saying is that let's be practical about it. I mean, let's be open to the idea of psychic gifts. I believe in psychic gifts. But also be careful. And when you're dealing with something like a murder case, is it another input of information? Absolutely. But I would not use it as 100%. Oh, okay, now we know the answer. It could be another tool used along with DNA. I know in that case, I think they were even, at this late date, able to get a little bit of DNA, I think. So I guess my point is that I would put it in the toolbox, but I wouldn't rely on it solely, and I wouldn't count on it 100%.
Yeah, because think about that poor woman lives the rest of her life thinking her daughter's dead. Yeah,
and never knew because she passed away.
That's absolutely tragic. Yeah, that's very tragic.
I mean, again, I'm a paranormal believer, but not so much so that my brains fall out. So I think we need to be practical about it. But I really believe, Christine, that there's more to life than what we can weigh on a scale and measure on a test tube, whether it's things that my family's experienced. I've experienced a couple of things. And whether it's the countless stories I hear on my show, Jim Harold's Campfire, people call in with their stories. I mean, do I believe each and every person who says they saw a ghost has seen a ghost? But I believe that they believe it. And I think many of them have seen something that is not understandable by regular explicable means.
Right. Okay. First of all, I want to tell the story-worthy audience that you're very handsome.
Oh, thank you.
and you're not an old guy. I'm just saying, like, sometimes I was listening to your voice. You know, I've been listening to your show in the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. And you don't look like what you sound like. I just want to tell you that. No, you're a young guy. You're a handsome guy. And here's what I like about the way you approach all of this. You just have an open mind. You're not a witch or a warlock or a psychic or a medium, or you're none of those things. But you have an open mind to listen to people that, like you said, they believe. So then you listen to them and validate at least that they believe. And I think that's like a great service that you do for everybody in America. And I suppose the podcasts go everywhere. So the world.
Well, thank you for that. And the thing is I do believe that some of the people who I speak to, I mean, there have been stories where I basically will say to them in a very loving way, there's two explanations for this. Either you're lying or you've experienced something supernatural. And I don't believe you're lying because the sincerity comes through. And there's really no benefit to somebody to call up to my show and make up a tale. I'm sure it's happened a few times, but the vast, vast majority of people I speak with, I think, are incredibly sincere.
Yeah, it definitely may have happened. You know, somebody tries to punk you, or like a Howard Stern fan calls in, or something joking.
I think I had one of those, which I never aired because I got it. I knew what they were doing. I think I got one of the Howard Stern things.
Sure. And it's kind of funny. But then, like you said, you just weed it out. But it's flattering to think that anybody even would want to punk you, because that says that you're doing something. You're making moves. You know, you're disturbing the peace. So I like that. Now, today you bring forward the topic, discovering the unknown, with you, paranormal. Can I say paranormal expert? Is that too much to say?
I don't really know that there are paranormal experts.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call myself a paranormal expert. I think there are people who are expert in the history of the paranormal, the different theories about the paranormal, but actually being an expert about the paranormal, and I've had many other people who know way more about this than me say the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, engineering. You can have an expert on engineering because it's nuts and bolts. You can lay it out. You can explain it, or whatever the topic is. The paranormal is so hard to grasp, and there's so much to it that we can't see, that I have a really hard time calling myself an expert. Now, do I know more than most people about it? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So your story, you're going to tell us how this ever even began. You're going to let us know, like, how you started this journey and making all these successful podcasts. So I'm anxious to hear your story. But before we get to your story, let me ask you something. You tell me, is this paranormal or is this supernatural? Okay, the Loch Ness Monster.
Well, I think most people would consider it, I don't know, it could be both. I think it could be both. I mean, to me, I don't know that it's supernatural, because to me, the most likely explanation of the Loch Ness Monster, if it exists, and the jury is still out as far as I'm concerned, same with Bigfoot, which is probably one of the things I vacillate back and forth on Bigfoot. To me, it's probably an animal. Now, some people say it's extra dimensional and then it pops in and it pops out, in terms of Bigfoot, for example. But I tend to think if either of those exist, that they're an animal. So probably more into the paranormal camp, I would think, because it's not supernatural. Now, if it's interdimensional or something, like some people speculate, then it would be more supernatural.
Now, UFOs. What are UFOs? I mean, that's not supernatural.
Again,
and that's not...
Yeah, I think I'm more into the paranormal line. Because when I started my first show, which I still do today, the Paranormal Podcast, started that in 2005. I said paranormal because to me it meant all of it.
I see.
It meant UFOs, ghosts, cryptids. I meant that as an umbrella term. Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily think UFOs are supernatural. I think that they're probably based on science, and I tend to lean towards the idea that some of them, a small percentage, are extraterrestrial in nature.
Yeah, interesting. Is there anything that you flat out say, okay, no, there's no way? Like, can you think of any example where you just say, no, that's not, no.
I think when people bring up like this interdimensional Bigfoot, that's where I say, I don't buy that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are a lot of people who have had Bigfoot sightings who are well-schooled in nature. You know, there's forestry workers, there's hunters, there's people who are familiar with the wilderness that I've seen one of these things. So I find the existence of them in small numbers hard to totally discount. Although I wonder why we haven't found a body.
Yeah.
I know what the explanations are by the believers, but still, I still hold out that there could be a flesh and blood Bigfoot. But when people say, well, it's beaming in from other dimensions and beaming out, it's like,
wait a second, though.
That's just my bias, though. I will have a conversation with someone about that, though, and welcome them on my show because, again, I'm not an expert. That's why I have them on my show.
And so are you saying that you think when you say there's no body, do you mean a Bigfoot body or somebody he would have killed?
No, Bigfoot body.
A Bigfoot body,
because, yeah. I mean, my question to people who really say this is absolutely true, I say, well, where's the body? Now, they say that typically nature takes care of its own. You don't walk through the woods and find a deer carcass or a bear carcass, and that's why. But I would think we'd find a bone or fur or something that could be sampled. But then again, there's a famous film, 1967, the Patterson-Gimlin film, that one of Bigfoot walking, and that's been stabilized. If you look at that, it looks like muscle tone. It does not look like a suit. So it kind of depends what I believe on Bigfoot by the day, Christine, that you ask.
That's pretty cool, man. I think that's really cool. All right, we're going to get over your story in just a second. But before we do, I wanted to remind everybody that I am back with all new episodes of Storyworthy for 2023. I know I had a couple of reruns on recently, but now I'm back and keeping on top of Storyworthy. But also, please, I want you to check out my other podcast, My Life in 3 Songs. It's exclusively on Spotify because we listen to the music and then we chat about it. And I don't steal music. So you got to go over to Spotify. It's totally free. Download the app and all that. It's very simple. And then listen to My Life in 3 Songs. I'm so proud of it. And I have such amazing comedians on. And we talk about the 3 songs that have impacted their lives. So please check it out. I just love this show. So again, mylifein3songs.com and follow the show on social media at mylifein3songs. All right, you guys, he's here right now. You hear him talking. Jim Harold. What an interesting person. He is among America's most popular paranormal podcast hosts. The Paranormal Podcast and Jim Harold's Campfire. Now, those 2 shows have been going for at least 15 years, 15 years, right?
Paranormal Podcast since 2005 and Campfire since 2009.
Yeah, just so interesting. And then you also have another podcast called Jim Harold's Crime Scene.
Yes.
And now what's that one?
Well, I almost have 200 episodes of that one done, and that's about true crime. And the weird thing about that, Christine, this is my biggest career mistake. Back in 2011, I started Jim Harold's Crime Scene, which was before Serial. And I put it
many
behind
years before Serial.
I put it behind my Plus Club paywall. So nobody saw it for years. And then I kind of half-heartedly made it free and kind of let it go. And then I restarted it again here in January. And we've had Pulitzer Prize winner on, multiple Pulitzer Prize winners over the years. But I'm really excited to bring that back and talk to authors and real experts on the topic of true crime. And I do that every week. Just got off a call about John Wayne Gacy, which was very disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Well, this is so interesting. And this is one of the reasons why I love podcasting. I started in 2010. And this is exactly, it's a great example of what you can do. The power that we all have now to put out a podcast, maybe pull it back. No, then reintroduce it. No, I'm going to change the logo. No, I think I'm going to use different music. But that's beautiful because it's an art form and you can scramble it any way you want. And then you just proved that you can pull it out from behind that paywall. And if it's evergreen content, boom, you're going to get your listeners. And you do.
Yeah. And the piece is that's what I love, Christine, about what I do. I used to work for big conglomerates in media. I was on the ad side. I was a frustrated broadcasting. I had gone to school for broadcasting, ended up working on the business side. In 2005, I said, you know what? I can't go and quit and go to some TV station in Paducah. Can't do that. I've got two wives. No, I'm not I've got 2 kids, 1 wife.
Right. You just can't go to a small market. You can't go to a small market in Texas and start over. You're not 20. Right.
So right. I heard about this podcasting thing and I said, I'm going to podcast And that will be so much fun. And, it'll just be a hobby. It costs me $20 a month. It'll be a hobby. It'll be fun. And I said, well, what am I going to podcast on? I'm like, oh, my God, it's obvious. The paranormal. I've been fascinated by it going back to Leonard Nimoy in the late 70s when I was a little kid. And, I've just always loved it. Went into a bookstore, went in a library, went right for those paranormal and supernatural aisles. I'll start a show. Hey, there's not much on paranormal. I'll start a show called the Paranormal Podcast, which,
it's
is
just
amazing.
So smart.
You got that name. As far as I know, Christine, that is the longest running continuous paranormal podcast on the internet, as far as I can tell. There's people that started a few months after me, great people who are still going today, but I think I was the first who's still going. But anyway. Point being,
what's exciting is you've grown from that and you've created these other shows. So like you said, the crime scene show, and then you have another one called You Won't Believe What Happened to Me. So I'm assuming that's true stories of survivors.
Well, no, what happened was we wanted to do a campfire, but without the supernatural, like weird things that happen to people.
Okay,
And again, this is the power of podcasting, and this is what I love about it is you can tweak and you can change, and you don't have to get anybody's approval. I do that show with my wife, and we decided that we didn't feel that format was working great last year when we were doing some shows. So this year, in January, we changed it, and we made it kind of stories about strange things that have happened to people, and we discuss them, and then we throw in one caller per show.
Perfect.
And that's why I love I'm essentially, and you're doing the same thing, running my own little media company.
Yep.
The burden is on me to make something work or not work. If it doesn't work, I can change it. I don't have to answer to anybody. I get to, and sometimes my ideas work brilliantly, like the Campfire, which is the reason I can do this full time. And sometimes they fall flat on their face, but it's all on me. And I love that.
Yeah, you have the power, right? Nobody's going to tell you to stop podcasting, or nobody's going to tell you that doesn't work, because who cares what they say? You're going to do it anyway.
Right, exactly.
It's pretty cool. And now you're also the executive producer of a newer show called Unpleasant Dreams, which is people reading famous spooky stories. So what is that? So people read The Telltale Heart, or what?
It's actually a person, my daughter. Nico baby. No, no, she graduated about a year and a half ago from college, and she's working in the medical field. But she wanted to keep, she had a minor in drama and very active in high school and so forth. And she wanted to keep a hand in it. And I said, I've got all the equipment here. Do you want to do a show? So what we've been doing, we started it out again. We had 3 shows that we totally retooled in January, and this was the 3rd one. Originally, she did paranormal cases, like famous paranormal cases, and I think she did a good job with that. But honestly... Meaning
that she just read them, or what are you saying?
No, we would do research, and I had a writer, a very good writer, who would write stories around these famous cases.
Okay.
But that didn't resonate with her because she's not like me. She's not a paranormal person. But what she is a literature person. And she loves classic literature. So what we did is this year we relaunched it, and she's doing weekly stories of classic horror stories and with suspenseful music, a little more narrative than the kind of stuff I do. And it's a lot of fun. And she does a great job at it. She's done The Monkey's Paw, which is a great classic story.
Sure.
There's one she just did recently, August Heat, which I'd never heard of, which is like a Twilight Zone-y kind of story.
Yeah.
And
that's such a wonderful thing to be able to sit down, whether you're on your, whether you're laying in bed and going to sleep, and then you get to hear these cool stories. I mean, that's really great. I'm going to check that out for sure. By the way, your show, the Paranormal Podcast, holy cow, do you have some creepy music in there. There's like this dark piano music all on the bass notes. It's like I don't know if it's all the Black Keys or what, but it is so dark and so scary. And I think of Chilly Billy, because I grew up in Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. So it was like Chilly Billy, Bill Cardill's Late Night. Do you remember any of this?
Yeah, we had similar kind of things. Almost every town back in the day had horror hosts. So we had, before my day, there was Ghilardi, who was actually Ernie Anderson, who became the voice of the Love Boat, which I can't.
Oh my
gosh. You know the voice I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Used to do all
funny.
the ABC stuff, America's Funniest Home Video, a great voice. That was Gilardi. That was in the 60s, early 60s in Cleveland. Then he was succeeded by Big Chuck and Houlihan, which was, I could just barely remember, and then became Big Chuck and Little John, and they were on the air for 25 years. So I love those old school horror hosts, something that, you know, my kids really never got to experience, but it was so cool being kind of in our cohort, in our peer group, that we got to experience it. That was always so fun. And I think that helped engender the spooky too.
Yeah. But we only had 5 stations. So when that TV show would come on at 11:30 on a Saturday night, you know, and the parents are bowling and you're there with a babysitter, and we would put that on. I think, again, it was called, oh God, I can't remember, Chili Billy something. And then he had a co-host, and her name was Terminal Stare. And she just stood there and stared, and she didn't speak, and she scared the hell out of me. And now when I look back, I'm like, that was just some girl, maybe his girlfriend, and she just dressed up in that crazy outfit and then just stood on the stage.
Yeah. It's amazing.
I love it.
The theater of the mind. And for example, like when people listen to my shows, and you probably get the same thing, they think like you have this army of people behind you working with you. And it's kind of like what you said, watching that show, you thought it was like, oh, who is this mysterious woman? But you think about it, and they were just putting together a little show. And it is fascinating how we get these thoughts about the people that we listen to in podcasts and radio and watch on television and in movies, when sometimes the reality is quite different.
For sure. All right, you guys, wherever you are, put your hands together for the very talented Jim Harold.
My podcasting journey in the paranormal has taken kind of a long and labyrinthian field to get us or get me where I am today. And it really started with a kid in the late 70s in elementary school who loved to watch on Sunday nights on his local ABC affiliate In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And I was amazed by these stories of not what I was hearing in school was science, but I was hearing these amazing stories, how things could be possible. Like Bigfoot. You know, was there some kind of monster running around in the woods of America? UFOs? Were there space aliens? What in the world was going on with the Bermuda Triangle? And that is something that started for me at a young age, and it went through my whole growing up years into young adulthood. And I also had another love in addition to the paranormal. I had the love of broadcasting. And I used to walk around my house, my mom used to tell me, and I would talk into a flashlight and say, I'm Bob Barker. So I loved broadcasting. So when I went to college, I was going to be a communications major no matter who made fun of me, and I was going to learn about broadcasting. And I did. I had a great teacher. I learned a lot. I was my college's broadcaster of the year. I thought, man, I am going to go into broadcasting. I'm going to be on air or some producer level behind the scenes. This is where I'm headed. Well, back in the day, in the early 90s, you got a job at a TV or radio station the first chance you got, because the internet really wasn't a thing. And the idea was to get call letters on your resume. So in my college, I found a radio station, a classical radio station of all things, that was looking for a sales assistant. So I took that job. I said, this will be great. I'll get call letters on my resume, and then I can go from there. I'll find a TV station or something. Do that for a couple of years. They really like me. I do a great job for them. And I'm like, you know, this sales thing isn't so bad. They make more money than anybody else in the radio station. And since this was a classical commercial station, which classical commercial stations basically don't exist anymore, I got to write copy and go help out on remotes. And it was all these things that were kind of fun. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but it was fun. And I said, I'll just go into sales here. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then I went to another station and found out it was totally different when you were working for a big conglomerate. You didn't get to do any of that fun stuff. You just basically, how many spots did you sell this month? Did you make your target? That. Well, by that time, I found the love of my life and got married. And fast forward about 10 years later, 2005, I find that I'm still working in a sales job. I'm not doing anything close to what I want to do. The kind of coolness of being in a building with a radio station had turned from being something cool to almost a torment. Because it's like, oh, look at all the cool stuff they get to do, and I don't get to do any of it. All I'm worrying about is selling another schedule of spots. So I heard about this thing. I'm a big fan of Leo Laporte, the tech podcaster. I'm still a fan of him. And I heard him talking about this thing called podcasting. And then I started to listen to Adam Curry, who had a show at the time called Daily Source Code. And I heard that people were making these things at home. And I'm like, well, you know, I can't broadcast for a living, but maybe I could do this. Maybe I could do this for fun and a hobby. At least it's something fun I could do. So then I said, well, what am I going to do? Politics, I don't want to argue with people. I have my beliefs, but I'm kind of like a live and let live person, you know?
Yeah.
I don't like say, you have to believe like me. I'm still that way, by the way. Music, you can't do like, I know you're doing a music show and you have to do that on Spotify only, but that didn't exist back then.
Right. That just started a few years ago.
Yeah. Sports. What am I going to do with sports? You know, what am I going to add?
Well, plus sports doesn't last. It's like this week's show is over.
That's right. That's right. It's not evergreen. But I wasn't even thinking. I was just thinking of things that really interest me. And I mentioned some of them. And then I thought, the paranormal. Every time I go in a bookstore or a library, when people still did that, I would go right to that section. And it was never big enough.
Yeah, because you're like, read it.
Yeah. And the thing is that, you know, there was the great Coast to Coast AM on radio with Art Bell and then George Norrie, but there was nothing really. There were some podcasts, but I'm like, there's not much here. So I thought, I want to start a paranormal podcast. What could I call it? It's paranormal. It's a podcast. It's paranormal. It's a podcast. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. The Paranormal Podcast.
The alliteration,
which continues
yes.
to this day and is now a registered trademark. But anyway, the point being, I said, this will be great. I will get some of these great thinkers and so forth, and I will, I'll have all the answers in 6 months. I'll have this all figured out. Well, Christine, more questions today, 18 years later than when I started. The next stage was we started Campfire in 2009, didn't have a show that week, said we'll do caller stories. And I was amazed at the reaction to that. And I'm like, this is a whole other podcast. And that podcast, Jim Harold's Campfires, is the reason I can do this full time. And then 2011, I went to or 2012 actually, I went to my wife and I said, you know what? I can't go full tilt boogie like I am with these podcasts. Am I do my full-time job? Can I quit my full-time job? And she said, go for it. And
wow.
Yeah, that's a big wow. With 2 young kids, going to private school, with that mortgage and all the stuff that goes along with it, that's a big wow. And she was working part-time as a speech therapist doing teletherapy. She had just started, but it wasn't like we needed that full-time income come. And I said, I think I can replace it. And I was able to, and I've been podcasting full-time since June of 2011, and I'm very grateful and still fascinated by the topic. Even though this is my business, it's also still my passion, and I'm truly fascinated by the paranormal and the supernatural, and that's where I am today.
I think it's astounding. I think it's so impressive. Most people don't know that podcasting goes all the way back to 2005. And when we talk about it going back that far, you're talking about the ability to get an RSS feed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I started with Libsyn, and luckily, I mean, a lot of that stuff had just been rolled out when I started. You used to have to, I was right after you had to hand code your RSS feed. Libsyn, and when I talk, like Libsyn is a big corporation now, but when I started working with them, it was like they called them the 2 Daves, who they left since, but there were 2 guys basically running the whole thing.
Yeah.
And them along with Blueberry were a big reason I think podcasting took off, because there were companies that people could go to, regular people who didn't know how to code, and they could get an RSS feed and they could get a basic website and they could do things like that.
And when we say RSS feed, it actually stands for really simple syndication. So it's a very simple it's a simple word RSS feed. And once you have that, it's almost like if you own a YouTube channel. Like you can put anything on it and nobody can take it away. Now that being said, if YouTube goes down, then you don't have anywhere to put it.
Right.
But an RSS feed is go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say RSS is in some ways better than YouTube because
that's what I'm saying.
Google,
much better.
Yeah, if Google decides they don't like you, and YouTube decides you got a YouTube channel, that's how you make your living, you're gone. Ostensibly, with an RSS feed, as long as you have your hosting and everything, even if you're deplatformed on one or the other, you could continue. Now,
that's right. You can't take it from my cold, dead microphone. That's right.
Yeah. Now, I don't think I'm doing anything that would get me deplatformed. I'm talking about ghosts and UFOs and the afterlife and things like that. But the point is that it's, they say don't build your business on somebody else's land or somebody else's ground.
Yes.
And when you do, and I have a YouTube channel, and I'm trying to grow that along with everything else, but I would never make that the lead product. I would never make that the lead thing.
Right. And it's the same reason why you need to have your own website, because if you just use the Libsyn website, well, what if Libsyn goes down? Then you have nothing.
Yeah,
so you do have to
keep your website.
Yeah, me too. You got to keep your products very close to you, for sure.
Absolutely.
And so when people call into Campfire and they're just telling you their own experiences, they start talking and you think, oh, I know where this is going?
Yeah, I do. And then sometimes they make a total left-hand turn. And things like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. I mean, it's amazing some of the stories that people tell me. I'll give you one that we had recently. It was a gentleman who was on from, he was talking about a story that happened to his grandmother in Pakistan. And this is years ago. And the woman saw somebody outside, a man. And a man who she thought it was a man smoking. So she went outside to shoo him away from the property, saying, "We don't know who you are. Get out of here." And it was a disembodied hand smoking a cigarette.
Oh, shit. You're kidding me.
And she shooed it off, and it did end up disappearing. Very brave woman, a lot braver than me.
Wow.
I'm kind of like, if you remember, this is a throwback, like the ghost in Mr. Chicken. I would be Don Knotts. But,
wasn't that shot in Pittsburgh?
I don't know.
I think it was. Okay.
But anyhow, the point is that, I totally thought, oh, it was a ghost and she shooed him away or whatever. And then once disembodied hand. And that's the thing about Campfire. I mean, with Campfire, I've been doing it since 2009. I have to remember how many episodes we're up to. And
hundreds.
At this point, I take, we just published last week 591.
Wow.
So I've taken thousands of stories, but it never fails that somebody comes up with something that's new and fresh. And that's why I love that show so much. There's always new stories. And I believe there's something, the majority of these stories, I believe there's really something to these. And people are experiencing weird things. And it's not just your traditional ghost story. It's things like time slips, maybe going into another dimension or reality, the afterlife.
What does a time slip mean? What's that mean?
A time slip is where something happens and you lose time, or you go back in time and those things. Early on in the show, and the gentleman, luckily, he's doing well today, but he had been a cancer patient. And while he was dealing with this, the one thing he would use as a distraction is he would go to the movies. And he went to see Hellboy one time with his wife. And they only had, it was like one screen that had Hellboy. So they walk in and it's like the afternoon and they get their concessions. They walk in and they see what they think a trailer is. And they sit down and say, oh, we must have hear the trailers. And it turned out it was the end of the movie. But the movie was supposed to start. And they were seeing the ending. And the movie ended and people started to leave. And I'm like, it's weird. And he said something like, stopped by the usher and said, this was the 4:15 movie, yeah? And he's like, yeah, it's like 6 o'clock now. And he said, was this in any other screens? No. And when they went out, I guess it was the time of year when it got dark early, it was dark. And they'd only been in the actual theater for maybe 5 minutes.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I mean, that's a time slip. So, I mean, again, I don't think it's every day that it happens to every person. You know, if somebody says, you know, I have tea with the aliens every third Thursday of the month, I might be skeptical. But I think many times we get these little glimpses into an alternate reality or something. And I think it's a real thing.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Now, your kids are grown now?
Well, one's in college and one just graduated about 1.5 years ago. Yeah.
I guess I'm just thinking like when they were younger and they would say, oh, my dad. Hey, it's take your dad to school day. And then what? I mean, what did they think?
He's a professional podcaster on the paranormal. Well, the funny thing is, Christine, and you can relate to this because you're a longtime podcaster. We used to be made fun of because nobody had a podcast and nobody knew what it was. Now we're making fun of it because it's like, I've got podcasts. Well, so does everybody else. We're kind of, you know. So, yeah. And the funny thing is that my kids, we made sacrifices and they went to nice schools and they went to private school. And, you know, everybody else, my dad's a doctor, my dad's a lawyer. My dad podcasts a Bigfoot. You know.
That's super funny. Yeah, that's super funny. Yeah, my kid, when they were 3, I started podcasting. So they are definitely grown up with it. But I like that. I like that my kid sees me doing art. They see me doing what I want to do. They see me going for the dreams, you know.
Right.
So I like that. I like that they see that. Yeah, I like that they say that. Well, I just couldn't be more impressed with you, Jim. I'm so impressed, and I'm so happy you came on Storyworthy because I just love your story, and I think everybody else is going to be really interested in it too. You also sound very, you sound very practical. You sound very normal. You don't sound like you're a way out, crazy, psychic. You know, like you are very grounded, and you like you said, you take everybody's story for what they say because they believe it. So good enough.
Yeah, and I do, again, I have a belief, but I am grounded. I think this stuff exists, but I try to, again, kind of play that middle ground where I believe. I'm very open to it. I think a lot of it is real, but I also try to be thoughtful about it as well. That's the balance I try to strike.
That's right. I love it. You guys, don't forget, you've got to check out Jim Harold's Campfire and also the Paranormal Podcast. These are both anywhere you find your podcasts. Please take a look at those. And then also, Jim, you've made a lot of books. Holy cow. You turn these stories into books. You've got True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you have an adult coloring book.
Yes, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea. It's about stories from the show.
I think it's so fun. I want a coloring book. I love it. You are wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on Storyworthy. Really, this is such a treat. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. It's been an absolute blast.
All right, you guys, we got to wrap it up. But I did want to remind you, check out My Life in 3 Songs over on Spotify. Because, again, that's the show I'm really putting my heart and soul into. And it just means a lot to me. And I have thousands of Storyworthy listeners and only a few dozen My Life in 3 Songs listeners. Do you hear me? So what is happening? Why isn't this translating? You guys are my fans. You like me. I like you. So get over to Spotify and check out My Life in 3 Songs. Thank you. All right, you guys, one more time on behalf of the very talented Jim Harold. My name is Christine Blackburn saying, make it a story-worthy week.
Thank you. That was so nice.
Thanks for joining us on the Storyworthy Podcast. We'll be back next week with all new stories. Subscribe to Storyworthy on iTunes and visit the Storyworthy website at storyworthypodcast.com.
Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.